Remembering Rwanda, conversations about our shared history. Welcome to the podcast where we learn about the genocide in Rwanda against the Tutsi in 1994 and how literature and art create, shape, and restore our collective memory.
Once again, welcome back to Remembering Rwanda podcast. I'm Dora, and this episode is bringing a thrilling conversation with Boubacar Boris Diop, writer, journalist, and philosophy teacher from Senegal. The conversation was held in our virtual classroom and with our colleagues from the course Black Skin, White Bones, Rwanda 1994 and Humanities Memory Site at University of Vienna, where, as we already mentioned before, the idea for this podcast has been born. Most of this conversation is focused on Diop's novel from 2000, Murambi, The Book of Bones, and his writing process of this book. In this novel, Diop is telling a story about the 1994 genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda and tries to give the perspectives of all sides involved in this genocide. And to do that, he had to do a lot of research beforehand. In fact, he got an invitation to visit Rwanda and write about what happened. In 1998, 4 years after genocide, a group of successful African authors goes to Rwanda for 2 months where they are being introduced with terrifying events of 1994. Due to such organization, several art pieces which refer to the genocide were created, and among them is Murambi, The Book of Bones. Ever since it was published, this Diop's novel seems to get the best reviews, even though it carries such a horrifying tale. This book helps to understand what happened in Rwanda, and many claim that this book was what the world needed. And this is also supported by the fact that in October this year, Diop was awarded with the Neustadt International Prize for Literature for this book. Congratulations to an amazing author. Our conversation was opened with, as Diop says, a classical question he gets when talking about Murambi, the Book of Bones. What the relation between fiction and reality in his novel is. Let's find out the answer and continue listening to some of the parts recorded in our online lecture.
Do you have a kind of a percentage how much the part that is fiction is in relation to the part that's non-fiction?
The first question is, in fact, the classic one. People, they always ask, in a way, what is the part of fiction and the part of reality? You know, before I went to Rwanda, I wrote 4 novels, and they were all based on my imagination. I had to invent everything. For the first time, with Murambi, the Book of Bones, I went somewhere where something happened. I went to Rwanda, where 1 million people had been killed. 4 years earlier, I wasn't alone. We were a group of African writers from countries, from Chad, from myself from Senegal. 2 were, by the way, from Rwanda. We found them in Kigali. What do you do with that? So many people killed, and it was the way it was done was just abnormal. Nobody should die, nobody should be killed, but you can't understand so much hate. Why these people was killed in such a brutal way? How do you tell this story? There was bodies everywhere, blood everywhere. If you write a book just being, I would say, so alarmist, you won't convince people because they will think, oh, okay, he went to Rwanda, he wrote this book, That's fine. But it's all imagination. So when you write a book about a genocide, your worst enemy is your imagination. It's a paradox because usually we use our imagination. When I went to Rwanda, I understood that I had to stick to the facts. And sometimes I heard or I witnessed terrible things. And when I was writing my novel, I just thought, if I write that, nobody would believe me. And it will be an excuse for people. Because when the genocide was happened, nobody cared. People, they just thought, oh, it's Africa, always killing each other. If it's abominable, what will happen? They will say, oh, we were right to not care. I wanted people to deal with this matter rationally. I want them to feel guilty. When we say never again, for me, that's what it means. But you can't write without. I think even a scientist, when he describes things in a scientific book, even unwillingly, he or she will change at some level things. You take the historian, he's supposed to just tell the facts, just how they happened in the past, but he will change. So let alone a novelist. Our job, our work is to tell and to change. Because if you just describe what you saw or what you heard, nobody will be interested. I can give some examples. What I mean here is that Jessica and Cornelius, my two main characters in Murambi, the Book of Bones, they are real persons, but they are not the same in my book as in their real life. Another example is Karekezi, Dr. Karekezi. I was inspired by an archbishop of Bikongoro, called Augustin Misago. He was the one who planned and organized the killing of Murambi, Augustin Misago. But for the sake of having a character who are the family, I just decided his name in my book will be Karekezi, and he will not be an archbishop. He will be a doctor. If you are a doctor, you can have a family, you can have a wife, you can have kids. But normally, if you are an archbishop, a priest, you can't have a family, you can have a wife and children. So yeah, I changed, but everything I wrote in this book is true. Sometimes I used to think about my own Murambi, the Book of Bones, as a huge understatement. I just mean that I avoid systematically to be spectacular because it was spectacular, Rwanda. And I decide my book won't be spectacular. I don't want people to just say, oh, I don't understand, it's too complicated. This book is the only one I wrote in less than 5 or 6 years. I wrote Murambi in 2 years only. It's, I think, of all I have written until now, it's the book, the one which is easier to read. It's very, very simple. If you take Le Temps de Tamango, I mean my previous book, they are a bit difficult to understand. This one is very, very simple.
Was this your biggest challenge to write, or was it more difficult for you to write this kind of book, like with all this history that's really true, and you have to be very careful with what you write and what you say and what you don't say, because that's very important to say and not to say. And was this more difficult for you to write than your other novels in comparison?
Another good question. Before Murambi, if you read the books I wrote before Murambi, you will see that for me, writing was just a game. I used to enjoy the writing process, kind of playing with the structure of the novel, playing with the words, because I have been, I think, influenced by writers like Ernesto Sabato from Argentina, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, these South American novelists. So for me, it was just a game. I was just like a storyteller enjoying his own storytelling. But when you go to Rwanda, when you talk with the people who will become your character, you already know that you have a kind of responsibility. You want the people to be touched by their story, just as I was, but you also want people to really know what happened in Rwanda. I already said it's the first time I wrote a book based on real facts. It's something very strange. You know that you are going to write a novel, but you know that it won't be exactly a novel like the ones we know generally. And to be frank, we were there for 2 months, and then I left. I came back to Senegal. I didn't know if I would write a play or poetry or short story or a novel. It was the first time I really didn't know what to do, which literary genre I should adopt. And once I decided to write a novel, the main problem was how to do it, because what people were telling us when we were in Rwanda was so horrible that I was afraid nobody would believe me if I decided to just write that. My problem number 2 was how to have novel. I mean, I wanted everybody to speak. I wanted all voices to be heard in my novel, and so it's easy, the victims. Everybody can understand what they say. People, they can identify with the victims, but the killers, the perpetrators, it's not very, very easy. It was a huge difficulty. Yeah. So yes. At a personal level, this book has been the most. It was painful. Yeah, I'm hesitating to use this word because I don't want to be too grandiose. But I fell ill 2 times, and it was a friend of mine, an Algerian doctor, who helped me to overcome this. I fell because I had to watch so many documentaries, to read so many books. I've never done that, and what I read was just incredible. And also, I think I was weakened by a sense of shame. I was ashamed, as a human being. That's normal. we all are ashamed by what Hitler did to Jews as a human being. But I'm also ashamed, to be frank, as an African. The image of Africa is so bad that, when you witness these kind of things, you think, okay, it's really the racist people all around the world. They are just going to say, yeah, Africans, this is how they are. They won't be interested by the political mechanism of what happened in Rwanda. They just will say, oh, African men and women, they like blood, they like cruelty. That's not important. So I wasn't happy with that. The third reason why I felt really embarrassed, it was the fact that as an intellectual in an African country, in the heart of Africa, Rwanda, from April to July 94, more than 1 million people were killed at the rate of 10,000 people every single day for 100 days. And yet, I wasn't aware of that. It's like if an American intellectual said, oh, 9/11, I don't know, when did it happen? I'm not aware of that. In New York, I've never heard about it. So, that's the problem. I wasn't proud of that because, I have been a philosophy teacher, professor, a journalist by training, a writer. I had already published two or three novels, and yet I wasn't aware of what happened in Rwanda. It took me 4 years to know what happened in Rwanda. And for me, it was a huge embarrassment. And when I wrote the book, I felt this embarrassment, and that's why I wanted really people to understand after having read my book, to understand, to know more about the Tutsi genocide in 1994.
In terms of writing, it's such a solitary act for the most part, especially for a novelist. You do it alone. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned those 2 months that you spent with the other writers. How did the conversations that you had with other writers affect your own individual writing, which is so alone?
We didn't speak to each other. We were there as a group. There are many things, especially at the beginning of our residency in Kigali, many things we used to do as a group. We were together. We went to Murambi, to Nyamata, Kigarama, everywhere. We went together. But soon, after I think 2 weeks, we said, no, we have to deal personally with this matter, with this genocide. So if you take a group of people, any group, there are affinities between X, A and B, C and D, and my best friend, and he's still one of my best friends in this group, was Kursi Lamko, renowned writer from Chad. We used to talk, but I don't think it had any influence on my work or on his work. Our books are very, 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 very different. I would like to add something. we went there, we stayed 2 months, but Kulsilamko from Chad Republic was the one who said, okay, I came here as a writer, I wrote a book, but it's not enough. It's not enough. What does it mean? He asked himself. He's a very honest guy. What does it mean to write a book about a genocide and to go back to N'Djamena? And he decided to stay in Rwanda for 4 years to help young Rwandans to teach theater, because he's mainly a playwright, to teach theater at the University of Butare. He was the one who did that. And later he published a book called La Phalène des Collines, The Butterfly on the Hills. My own translation.
I've never come into such close contact with complicated human characters. You talked about the difficulty of identifying with a killer, and the pain that you felt when writing this book. If you're willing, would you, could you talk to us maybe about some of these real people that you met? Because that's a world that I can't even imagine. That's a situation I can't even put myself in. And I wanted to ask you what that might have been like.
Real people, you mean among my characters?
Yeah, or when you were conducting the interviews, or when you spoke with Rwandans who had taken part.
Yes. When they go through these kind of horrifying experience, it seems that they become stronger. For example, Jessica in my book, her real name is Jane in French, Jeanne Kayitesi. And during the genocide, he was a member of RPF. But she was undercover in Kigali during the genocide, pretending to be a Hutu, but she was spying. I think I was really impressed by her. But the person who really impressed me and changed the way I was writing this book, his name in Murambi, the Book of Bones, is Simeo. In real life, this man is or was called, because he was so old at that time, maybe he passed away, I don't know, Apollinaire was his real name. And the one who brought me to his house, to his home, to talk with him, it was Jeanne Kayitesi. I felt this man was very simple, very poor man, but he was really charismatic. He was so charismatic. I will never, never forget Apollinaire, Simeon in my book. And he was the one who helped me to understand. As I said, I read so many books before to meet people. But he was the one who really helped me, better than any book, to understand the history of Rwanda, the relationship between Hutu, Twa, and Tutsi, the role of the church. Because he was, at that time, he was, I think, in his 80s. So it was his own life he was talking about. And what he basically told me is that, and I put it in my book, we must stop the cycle of revenge. You killed me, I will kill you the next time I have opportunity. He told me, at what time we just used to stop. But, for a novelist, all this is interesting. A charismatic old man talking about his experience, what he knew about Rwanda from his own experience. But he was also playing sitar, and he did it very well, singing, telling Jan. I think Jan was in 30, 40, yeah, telling her I love you. This kind of it was just extraordinary. It was I felt emotional at the moment. And when you write a book about such a dark page of history, how do you conclude it? You need, as a writer, to give the reader some hope about human beings, about the human soul. And I found it with Apollinaire. He was the one who helped me to have these very, very optimistic, very, very last lines of my book. So I met other people, but Jessica and Simeon, Jeanne and Apollinaire, they were really very, very important to me.
This is Remembering Rwanda podcast, and you're listening to a conversation with Boubacar Boris Diop, Senegalese author who is talking about Murambi, the Book of Bones, his novel from 2000 in which he depicts the story of the 1994 genocide against Tutsi in Rwanda and gathers the voices of all its participants.
My question was really about the emotional struggle. How do you go to deal with it? Because I feel like when you're writing a book, obviously, as you did in this one, I haven't read it, but the professor made a very good portrait of it. So I'm looking forward to reading it. And obviously, it can be not easy, but we tend more to be compassionate about those people that were killed, their families, how do they feel, because it's so unfair. But then you have the other side of the killer, and especially since you want to write something that is not biased, so you have to take the opinions of everyone. And I was really wondering, did you had some kind of mental preparation as to saying, okay, I am going to be listening about someone who killed people cold-blooded, and I will have to type that in and tell their story. Did you not feel some rage? I don't know how did you go with that, and also did you manage somehow to also understand their motivations? Did you manage to connect with them as you would connect with the victims?
I remember we went in a place called Nyarubuye in the eastern part of Rwanda, near Tanzania. And there you had prisoners, killers, perpetrators, who were walking on the very place where they killed their Tutsi victims. One of them was on the top of a roof. I look at him, and he did a gesture to show me he doesn't regret what he had done, that we had nothing to do there. All this without speaking. But if I understand your question, you want to know if I had to manage some kind of sadness, of anger. Oh yes, you have to. But to be frank, my anger was especially directed to France and to François Mitterrand, who was at that time the French president. Because, when we went to Murambi, we saw a French flag, and we asked how it is that we have this here. And we were told when people were killed in Murambi, they used to kill people and go somewhere else, kill other people. They didn't bury corpse. And but when French military of Operation Turquoise, they came there, they said, this Murambi school is a very good place for us to settle. But please, can you hide all these bodies? They asked it to the killers. The bodies were buried, and on top of the mass graves, they had their flag, they had a basketball ground, volleyball, football, barbecue, normal life. And I was really angered by that. And yet, you have in my book a French guy, I think he's a Colonel Perrin, and I said, okay, I'm angry with French military, with French people, with François Mitterrand, but I don't want my characters to be too caricatural. To keep being optimistic, I had to emphasize what many Hutu did to help Tutsi, to hide them, to feed them, you have in the novel, a man called Tonton Nicolas. He was hiding young Tutsi, some children, in his house, but the rest of the day used to go and kill the Tutsi in, I think it's in the city of Butare. You have to fight back your own emotions, and that's what I did. If you are too emotional, your reader won't be. It will sound kind of fake, but if you keep cool, have a chance to move your reader.
So my question is about the language problem. Like you have created also so many books in Afrikaans, like in Wolof. So my question is that the book of the Murambi, the book of the bones, as you have mentioned, the aim was to arise the collective memories about the human beings, especially for the African readers. So have you considered about to translate some of the books, not only in English, French, but also to find some of the translators to translate it into Swahili or Kinyarwanda, the other African indigenous African languages in EAC community, EAC countries or SADC countries? So this is the first question. And the second question is, as you have been not a novelist, but also a screenwriter, and have you thought about or tried to adopt it, some of the novels like this Murambi, the Book of the Bones, into the movies, especially in this era of the Mighty Asians era?
First of all, I think I started writing in my mother tongue, in Wolof, precisely because of my Rwandan experience. Maybe it would be too long to explain. So I decided to write in Wolof just because I went to Rwanda, because I understood that the genocide was not only a cultural problem, a political problem, it was also, and maybe it was mainly, a cultural one. And when you say culture, the most important tool, that's language. So I said, I always wanted to write in my mother tongue. Now I will do it. And I started writing in Wolof. So, yes, I wanted at that time, really, I had no question writing in French, and the book has been translated into German, into Spanish, into English, of course, etc. In Italian, Portuguese, in Brazil. But I don't. I think when something happened in Rwanda of this scale, you have to talk to the whole world about it. Maybe mainly to Africans, and I would say even to young Africans. But my target was the whole universe. That's good. But you are right to point out that it would be good if we could translate it into Kinyarwanda, Swahili. Yes, we always want to do it. But what I see is that maybe the time for that has not yet come. That's the right thing to do, clearly, but the time has not yet come. Why do I say that? Because two people wanted to translate this book in Kinyarwanda, in Rwanda. They started, but they just had to stop. Someone started to translate in Pular, let's say in Fulani, but they just had to stop because they have so many things to do. There is a question of the readership who is going to read my book, this book, if it is translated into most of all, the very first experience. You mentioned Swahili. When I went to New Jersey at Rutgers University, I was teaching there as a visiting professor in 2004. I met someone from Tanzania, Ali Mazrui, by the way, who is cousin or the nephew of the historian we all know, Ali, the late Ali Mazrui. He started to translate Murambi in Swahili, but it went nowhere. That's why I say it's the right thing to do, but it's too early. 2 weeks ago, I had a webinar with Ngugi wa Chongo, and there is something Ngugi calls now the restoration project, meaning the books we wrote in European language. Now we are slowly, the process is very slow, but it's the right thing to do. We are slowly translating it in African language. And he asked why do not translate from Kikuyu to Wolof, from Bambara to Jula, etc., etc. Your second question, yes, there was a Cameroonian filmmaker, I won't give here his name, who bought the rights of Murambi and wanted to adapt it to cinema. And I told him, because I know very well African film, some filmmakers, I told him, okay, you can do it, but I will be the one who will write the scenario. He said yes, and he gave me a proposal. When he gave me his proposal, it was so bad. It was even so bizarre that I told him, okay, let's stop here. I'm no longer interested. For example, he wanted Jessica and Cornelius. We are like brother and sister in my book to become lovers. And there is, I think, a scene where, they were making love on top of a pile of skeletons, of dead bodies. I said no, that's not the book I have written, and we stop it here. Yes, I hope this will be done. I hope, really, I hope this will be done, because I think I will reach more more people. As for the theater, a play was adapted for theater in a Bordeaux by someone from DRC, Congo. So it was in 2006, 15 years ago. Yes, I hope it will be really adapted for cinema and even for theater. And and we might translate it one of these days into Wolof. This is very, very easy to do into Wolof.
I'm always thinking about differences between writing from an outside perspective, as you did, and writing as a survivor, for example. And I was just wondering, did you have conversations with other artists who were survivors? Like I've read an interview you did with Scholastic Mukasonga. And how did maybe if you've got conversations with them during your writing or research process? And yeah, just wondering about that, how you are dealing with artists who write about their experiences as survivors, and also if it's important for us as well to deal with those topics out of our perspective and write out of our perspectives, but also get engaged with the topics as well, not just leave it to survivors to deal with the topics and create art and deal with the trauma through literature.
Very, very important question, a great one. You know, for sometimes people they don't do it now, but for some time critics used to question our legitimacy as outsiders to write about a genocide which happened in Rwanda. They said, why don't you leave the Rwandan write their own story? And you know, when we were there, I used to remind this episode. When we were there, Rwandans, they told us, some of them, and very frankly, please don't write fiction about what we went through. Just tell the story. Because when it was happening, nobody wouldn't come to help us. We called for help, but nobody accepted. You know, it's of doubting our legitimacy too. But the truth is that at that time, the Rwandans, they didn't think about writing everything. The country was just destroyed. Everywhere, the smell of dead bodies. People had nothing to eat. And you had everywhere the shadow of 1 million people who had been killed just 4 years ago. So our role, our responsibility was like just in a family, in a district somewhere. There is someone is dead in a family. You go there to present your condolences. That's what we did. And I used to say, okay, we did that because at that time, the real victims were, to put it that way, they were speechless. They couldn't speak. They couldn't write. So our testimony was important in that sense. And now you see there is a big difference between that time and now. When we went in Rwanda in 1998, I think you had maybe only 2 or 3 Rwandan writers, 2, 3, 4 maybe, compared to Senegal or Ivory Coast or Cameroon or Congo. But between 2008 and now, you have dozens of survivors who have decided to write about their own experience. And their books, Mukasonga's books, Muyawayo's books, Mukagasana's books, Kaimaye, Rurangwa, all those books, they have more impact than ours. And I'm happy of that. By the way, some of them, they asked me to write the preface, the foreword of their book. And I did it. Yeah, I did it happy. I was glad to do it. I helped some of them find a publisher in Paris because I know the publishing system in Paris. So yes, it's interesting. In fact, literature, it's maybe unique in the history of universal literature. Literature was born out of all these sufferings in Rwanda. We can say that today, the most important part of African literature, I think especially Francophone African literature, that's the one written by the Rwandan survivors. And one last thing, when you consider this literary production from Rwanda, post-genocide, starting, I think, in just 2000, after our books were released, most of them, they are women. Yeah, most of them, they are women. Because during the genocide, men were killed and women, they became sex slaves, generally. So you had more survivors, more female survivors than male. And anyway, the ones who suffered the most, they were these women. Yeah. And that's a great question. I don't know the answer, but maybe it's because we went there that Mukagasana, Muyawayo, Bertekaitesi, Mukasonga, they all, I think, find the strength to write their story. We might have helped them in that sense.
We might have helped them in that sense, says Diop at the end of this conversation, and I am sure this book helped a lot of people in one way or another. However, this episode cannot be finished without reading at least some part of Murambi, the Book of Bones. So now, for the end of this episode, let's listen to one very important quote from this novel.
The Polytechnic was a crossroads, one of the few places in Rwanda where all actors in the tragedy had met: victims, torturers, and foreign troops with Operation Turquoise. The latter had set up camp, in full knowledge, on top of the mass graves. That was extremely bad manners. Had they believed, then, by behaving in such a way, that Murambi's dead were somehow missing that little something that made them human beings? Had they believed that they were missing a soul, or something of the sort? Cornelius thought of the old man. In those countries, a genocide doesn't mean much. Probably not even a detail. The old man, a bitter heart, a cold spirit, a curt voice. Offended, they said, to discover all too late that he was, after all, mortal. A bouquet of flowers for the widow, scornful words for the victims. History would bring him down a peg or two. But in the end, it didn't matter very much. Cornelius felt only the slightest bitterness. He was confident of the future, of its long memory and infinite patience. Sooner or later, in America and elsewhere, people will say calmly, "Let's talk about the 100 days in Rwanda again. There is no unimportant genocide. Rwanda, neither, is not just a minor detail of contemporary history." Cornelius was much more troubled by the calls to reason coming from those he admired or with whom he shared a close friendship. These foreigners, as horrified as he was by the killing at Kiroma, Nyamata, and elsewhere, had understood this. A genocide reminds every society of its essential fragility.
In the end, I would like to thank Boubacar Boris Diop for participating in our course and permitting us to publish this conversation. Thank you to our dear professor, Remy Chakote, for making this possible, and thank you to our dear colleagues, Verena, Brand, Angel, Lee, and Ines, who were asking the questions. For allowing us to read a quote from Diop's book, big thanks to the Indiana University Press, the publisher of the English version of Murambi, the Book of Bones, translated by Fiona McLaughlin in 2006. And thanks to Ona who read the quote. Massive thanks to Liam Colomer for letting us use his music, Wishing for a Better Future, and Remembrance, which is a part of the soundtrack for the documentary Generation 94. Also, thank you to you, dear listeners, for staying with this episode till the end. Hope you will join us in the following one, the final episode of Season 1. Until the next time.
Thank you for listening and participating in our collective memory. For further reading, please check out the links provided in the episode description. We really appreciate your curiosity. If you liked our podcast, please share it with other curious people around you.